Welcome to Rise from Switzerland, where, while still low, infection rates have doubled in the past week, where the government has now mandated masks on public transportation and initiated a 10-day quarantine for visitors from many countries around the world. I am Professor Demian Hodari of EHL Lausanne.
And from very lovely London, a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining from us from around the world. Welcome to the 12th edition of Rise. We are having a very, very special episode this week, and we are delighted to have you with us. As we always do, every week we get together at this time to get a sense of what in the world is happening around us during these interestingly challenging times. Importantly, we also get a sense of what's happening in our industry. What do we need to understand so we can all be excited to get back out and to travel again, which is a perfect link to this episode. Demian, why don't you explain?
Yeah, this week's episode is called Destinations. Are we there yet? Which all parents will understand why I said it that way. Many airlines have added planes routes and are selling out middle seats. Hotel occupancies are on the rise in Europe and the US. Indoor dining has been expanded in most parts of the world. And Anita has ventured out to the London parks to torment the squirrels. So while the world moves forward, the question is, where will they move to? What kinds of destinations will attract those that are willing and able to travel? And how do destinations stay relevant when people can't or don't yet want to travel? But before we explore those topics with our two executives in residence today, we want to know what you think about something similar. So can we get that first poll up for our audience, please? All right, Anita. Over 50% are saying the public's complacency towards safety protocols. So it's not the protocols themselves, it's people actually obeying them. And then we've got the second wave of the virus, which is either here or going to arrive. Reimposing of restrictions, lack of vaccine. Interestingly, nobody said nothing, not concerned. What do you think about that? I love those
results. Well, I don't love those results, but I'm intrigued by those results because they're actually all connected. People's complacency is what is going to lead to ultimately a second wave and reimposing of restrictions. So it's a very interesting one that whatever's happening out there, like we had with our first episode, uncertainty is the theme of COVID-19. Very interesting, and as always, invaluable to get a read of what our viewers are feeling right now at this time.
Yeah, and thank you for answering that. And please don't forget you have that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to send in questions for later on for Anita, myself, or for our executives in residence.
Brilliant. So as we do every single week, we want to get a sense of how do we separate the news from the noise? What do we need to know about what's going on right now and how that is affecting us going forward in the future? I must say, looking at this week, it was a challenging one because so much is going on and the uncertainty is now a headline. We saw in the Northern Hemisphere, it's summertime. Mother Nature is turning up the heat in terms of the weather, and it's fantastic. UK tourism, as we said, opened up this past weekend. And at the same time, we're finding that ultimately we're having to look very carefully at what the risks are. I must say, initially, I was very nervous at the beginning of COVID-19, but the most terrifying moment since for me was this weekend when I went to my local to have a glass of champagne with the GM, who's a very dear friend, and I had to put my skinny jeans on. If that was not terrifying after 100 days of wearing sports shorts, I'm not sure what is. But as we see, the EU is opening up as well. July 1st was the opening of Europe in terms of many destinations. My Secretary General making his first trip to Italy to actually go and see how things are working. But equally, we're finding that air bridges and corridors are being renegotiated because ultimately we need to make sure that as we ease restrictions, we need to be very cautious to make sure that travel is done in a way that's healthy, both for the economy and for the travelers. Because as we're seeing in Asia, especially India and China, there are alarming surges of cases, which is reactivating lockdowns, which is very, very unnerving. America is seeing challenges in Latin America, looking south, as well as we're seeing that in Africa. Very much the southern hemisphere, which is going into winter, now starting to struggle. Economic life support systems are being balanced vis-a-vis COVID-19. And we're still a world on watch for a vaccine that we know is dealing with the earlier mutations of COVID-19, not necessarily those that are actually developing as this virus continues longer and longer, which is a perfect bridge into my next slide. There was a study done in May of 17,000 people around the world. And the question was, when do you expect the outbreak to end? What do you think it's going to be in your own country? Interestingly, there was a high degree of people saying 2 to 3 months in their own country, but the majority are falling 6 months into a year, which is taking us into, in the Northern Hemisphere, the end of the year, which is another flu season. So very concerning from that point of view in terms of how the world is cautiously looking forward, but in their hearts, how they really feel we're dealing with this vaccine and how much time this is going to take. Which takes us into your slide, Professor Hodari.
Sure, I'm just going to focus on the US, which I did last week as well, but there's so much going on there, and I think it's a great case study for the rest of the world to be paying attention to. First thing was, it was the 4th of July weekend, probably one of the more important holidays in America. There were orders from the government's local and national pleas to people to please celebrate at home only with the people that they directly lived in. I have an exclamation and a question mark there because we still don't know the results of that. If people obeyed those rules. We know that in Washington, D.C., there were celebrations for 4th of July that weren't necessarily wanted by the local officials. I'm not going to mention who had that celebration. We've got in New York and California, counties postponing indoor dining, Miami closing hotel pools at 8 p.m. And I kind of mentioned those two as just examples of the vast variety of ways local officials are trying to demonstrate concern and action to prevent the spread of the virus. Closing pools. Texas governor has mandated masks. Battles ignited in Texas, right? The freedom, people saying this is against our liberty. A lot of people saying this is your social responsibility to wear a mask. So we'll see how that develops in the rest of the US. I thought this was really interesting. Studies have found that the Black Lives Matter protest did not lead to an increase in COVID-19 spreading, but Memorial Day celebrations where people were partying on the beach or at lakes, analysis has been tracked back to for mass spreading of the virus. So interesting how crowds can be perceived in two different ways. The US added 4.8 million jobs in June, but that data is from the 12th of June before the recent massive spikes in the virus spreading. So the concern is that in July and August, as businesses have to close or aren't reopening as was expected, those jobs are going to disappear. And finally, oddly, young people have been found to be throwing COVID-19 parties in the USA, where somebody who's infected throws a party and other people come, and the first one to get infected from that party wins a cash prize that was gathered at the party. Horrible idea. Felt like I had to mention it just to demonstrate the cavalier attitude in some places towards the virus and hope that our viewers are not falling into the trap of thinking that we are past the peak of this virus.
I must say that, Demian, as a Canadian, I'm very grateful that you take on issues south of the border. I'm not prepared to go there, but you make a really interesting point that for whatever's happening, 14 days is the window. We will see, even from July 4th weekend. It was the 4th of July in the US. In the UK, it was our own Independence Day as pubs opened up. But Mother Nature is cross. That is what's very clear. And as a result, it's making other people rightly nervous, which takes us into where is our industry right now? Building on the survey results that I spoke about in terms of where in the world are we, where in the industry are we? This was really interesting to see from the point of view of the same sample size of 17,000 people, what was their sense around when and where are they going to travel? When it came to confidence in travel, I thought this was very interesting, that ultimately it's about when the problem is over in my country, very much because people are looking at domestic tourism. But 1 in 4 people, Demian, 1 in 4 people are saying they're actually not sure. They don't know when they're going to start spending and travel again, because clearly there isn't confidence about travel safety continuing until we know there's a vaccine and there's control, which is why, going into the next slide, this I thought was fascinating, because whether someone's a Gen Z, a millennial, a Gen X, a baby boomer, or an elder like yourself, Demian, everyone is feeling the same, that for the next 12 months, long haul travel is going to suffer. And this is going to hit economies enormously, like those of one of our guests that actually depend a great deal on international travel. Why? Because people want to stay at home. The comfort zone has not yet expanded, and it's going to take a long time to warm up, which is why domestic tourism and staycations are very strong in terms of preference. Even from the point of view of, I'm not planning on taking a holiday, people have gotten used to just staying home, staying safe, and we'll see what happens with the rest of the world. Very interesting. But again, for those global tourism economies, 1 in 10 jobs around the world, 10% of GDP in 2019, this is very concerning. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. I mentioned that occupancy was rising in the US. And here you can see that STR and tourism economics are forecasting just a 36% drop in occupancy for this year. And I mentioned that because just recently, that number was closer to 45 and 55%. So that forecast is improving as people start to demonstrate that they're going back out to hotels. However, you can see that they're also saying that 2019 levels of occupancy, which were wonderful, we won't see those again for at least 11 quarters more, so until 2023. The issue there being, let's not confuse temporary short-term improvements and signs of optimism with long-term expectations of growth. The short-term and the long-term, very different for now. As we move on, we can look at some market data. And what STR has said is that the top 25 markets in the US historically are underperforming and historically outperform other markets by 15 to 20%, are underperforming other markets now. Similarly, in Europe, you can see some of the worst performing markets here that are listed here on the right are those that normally are the best performing markets. But if we click the slide, we notice now that the other markets in the US, those that are normally just average, are now outperforming those best markets. And our top 5 markets in Europe have never reached those top 5 before. And the point being, people are going places that they usually don't go. They're looking for less density. They're looking for places that are unusual, where they're not expecting to find crowds, where the prices are going to be good, and where they can drive to rather than fly to. So I don't know how long that's going to hold up, but it's interesting to see that the travel patterns are really far different from what they've been before, a little bit building on what you said before. And speaking about destinations that are off the beaten track, if you look at what Airbnb has found, for July 4th bookings in the US, they found that the number one type of places people were looking for were those that are unusual. Chalets, islands, cabins. These are the places people want to go to. Again, demonstrating this fact that we're not looking for the big hotels. We're not looking for, obviously, event hotels or even destinations where we expect to find lots of people. We want our space. We want to be safe. We still want to travel. So I expect that that's the pattern we're going to see going forward. People do want to travel, but the way they want to travel is going to be far different. Over to you.
Stunning. Excellent. And now if we look at it, this is one of my favorite sections because, Demian, we always get stunning, stunning questions coming in from our viewers, and we try our very best to answer them because this is about our viewers. Yeah. But that never always happens in the episode. So in 30 seconds, you send me one question and I'm going to send you one back. Go.
Here's yours. Do you believe travel packages will communicate an increased sense of confidence to consumers?
That's a great question. And interestingly, having Cyril with us last week from Expedia, this would have been a good one to send to him. But fundamentally, yes, for one single reason. Travelers are trying to mitigate risk, and not just financial risk, but health risk. By having packages put together, ultimately, the protocols can be assured that within that package, step by step by step by step through the travel experience, travelers will feel much more confident that they are safe because they are blanket protected through suppliers in the chain that are all connected based on safety, not just price. How's that?
30 seconds on the dot.
Excellent. To you, sir, I challenge you. We have a question regarding ultimately the industry as a whole. Do we believe package deals can lead to increased homogeneity of the industry as a result of what's happening now? Go.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at what TripAdvisor is doing, they're calling these things considered trips, where customers use the brand to plan all parts of their trip. And Expedia and Booking, they're doing something similar, calling it considered trips. And what this means is they want that customer to do everything through them. This is one way for them to differentiate themselves from Google. That's inevitably going to lead to homogeneity, because these companies are going to make larger profits by standardizing those trips across customers. So I do expect it'll happen.
Oh, at least 50 seconds.
No way. No way. I don't believe you. I'm going to watch the video later and see if that's true.
The fact that you said homogeneity that quickly, I'm impressed with.
All right, I'm going to check it.
What's going on, Prof?
All right. In the headlines this week, a couple of things I wanted to point out. First, building a little bit on what I talked about last week in terms of restaurants in the industry. McDonald's is backing away from their plans to reopen the restaurants in the US. The 85% of restaurants that were not yet open for in-restaurant dining, they've told those franchisees, no need to open, please don't open yet. The franchisees can if they want, but McDonald's is saying it's probably not time to do so yet. That's a bold move. This is not the government telling you you can't reopen. This is the company itself saying, we don't think it's safe and fair to open these restaurants yet, safe and fair for our employees and our customers. And this has sort of a reverberation, on the franchisees themselves. If you look here, we're noticing that the largest operator of Pizza Huts, for example, in the US has gone bankrupt. So we've talked a lot about the companies themselves, like McDonald's. We've talked about independent restaurants and forecasts that 1/4 to 1/2 of those will never reopen again. But don't forget the franchisees, those people that are operating the McDonald's, the Pizza Huts, the Subways of the world. They're kind of caught there in the middle. They act like independent restaurateurs, but they work for these chains and they're in danger of closing as well. So it's throughout that entire value chain of the restaurant industry that we're seeing some repercussions, and we need to be paying attention to that going forward. From the news today, right? A second destination, holiday destination in Spain has locked down once again. And I guess there's not much for me to say about this except told you so. This is not the first, nor will it be the last holiday destination this summer to have to re-lock down after the containment falters with inbound tourists. I understand the need to open up these destinations, but as we've seen in many places around the world, once we think we've contained the virus and we can do things safely, I have not yet seen many places that have managed to keep things safe as they increase business opening, especially now with tourists coming from all around the world. So for those of you that were planning August trips abroad, I do hope you have good travel insurance. And I have a third quick headline, right? Look at this. I think I have to earn my Grouch nickname from you and just say, I just think it's far too early to be celebrating the end of the virus. I understand the need to celebrate, and I too am looking forward to the day that we can say the virus has been contained, the vaccine is out there, and we can say goodbye to the devastation it's causing on countries, businesses, and most of all families. But it's just not time yet, in my opinion. Anita?
Demian, you are the Grouch with a capital G, but at least you're living your name, which is brilliant. And I must say, I've never heard someone actually reverberate the word reverberate when they were saying
I hope we can edit that out later.
Too much fun. However, one thing I love about this section is that we don't see our headlines until we actually show them to all of our viewers. And it was interesting to see how there's usually a commonality. And this links to your first two headlines and the fact that an article was done recently about what it's going to cost establishments to open up, whether they're hotels, restaurants, whatever they might be. The costs are huge. And to your point, a lot of them are questioning, is it even worth it? Like we talked with Marriott last week or 2 weeks ago when we said about the fact that some properties in New York, the premier properties, are not going to open because this is doing damage to their ability to deliver a luxury experience. This is an interesting question. Companies might be able to afford to, but they might choose not to because of the impact on brand and service delivery. Interesting point. Second headline goes to something that you spoke about actually up front. And this was the whole issue about the fact that countries are opening up, but there's caution being placed. This is very interesting to see. We saw that countries are now being let into the EU. We saw the 15 countries being listed, but what's incredible was to see the actual contribution. I've added the headline alongside tourism economics indicator of how much these countries are worth. So the US is not, for instance, on the list of EU countries because of the handling of the coronavirus and the concerns around a second wave. 10% of the EU's travel comes in from the US. So these are very conscious decisions being made, knowing they might risk the economies, but it's not worth risking the entire society of these regions itself. For my third one, now you gave me a lecture last week because you said enough of your airline advertising. So fine, I thought I'd do something different. And we love going behind the scenes with Rise to get a sense of what's really going on in the industry right now. We had a guest a couple of weeks ago from my client, CNN. And so I reached out to Richard Quest, a very loved colleague of mine, and asked him, explain to me what it's like putting on television in today's day and age of lockdown. And he shared this with me, which is interesting because you think 460 million households see Quest Means Business every night. This goes around the world. He's in his flat in New York City. He's got to connect with a production team somewhere else in the world and a special guest who happened to be my Secretary General in Rome that night because it was his first day back to Italy. So, specially for Rise, specially for you, Demian, with a big hug from my dear colleague, Richard Quest, we created this for everyone watching.
So you want to know what it takes to get on air for Quest Means Business from home? Well, first of all, you need lots and lots of devices. We have these two, which mean I can hear what's happening. We have this one, which shows me the scripts, the output in the various control rooms, the camera, of course. I can see myself and what I look like. Lots of light to make sure it all works. And this is the view that I see.
Now, how cool is that? And if you think of how nervous we get every week putting on a production, can you imagine broadcasting to the world every single day and the amount of prayer that goes into that? I thought that was very special. And thank you, Richard. We love you dearly and are very grateful for making that for us on Rise. Thank you.
That was very nice. I applaud you for that one. All right, enough from us. Let's hear a little bit more from our audience with our second poll, and then we'll bring on our executives to talk about those results. All right, so significant control of the virus. It's not just that people want to know that those places have control of it. They believe that destinations need to be actively promoting that. And that's a little different from something we've asked before about concerns. And then again, the health and safety protocols. So those are clearly what most people want and believe that destinations need to promote.
That's so interesting.
Let's invite our guests on now and see what they have to say about this and see if this is what they're doing or if they have a different view.
Brilliant. Excellent. So as all of you who watch know, one of the real joys of Rise is that we, Demian and myself, are able to bring on senior executive leaders around the world that we absolutely love, and they are specialists in their area. So we have two spectacular guests this week. Both are from island destinations, interestingly. To begin with, we have Niall Gibbons, who's the CEO of Tourism Ireland. He is from a country that is very close to my heart. I must say, he is the only leader in the global tourism community that my Secretary General believes should be featured on Eurovision because of his ability to cover great Beatles tracks, especially Love Me Do. Niall, we welcome you. And good evening, Jan Hutton, who is joining us from down under in Australia. She's the head of marketing, the GM of marketing of Tourism New South Wales. We welcome you both on. We are thrilled to have you on Rise. So Niall, rise and shine. Thank you for being with us today. And this evening, as your sun goes down, Jan, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you both for being here. I'm curious to know what you think about the results from that second poll, and if that's what you are advising your country to be doing, to be advertising the control of the virus and the demonstrate that the safety protocols are being instigated in your countries. Maybe Jan, maybe you want to start with that?
Yeah, thank you. And just to say what a treat to be with you. So wonderful to be here. Your poll's fascinating, and I would agree with your audience. I think that they're very well informed. I guess from an Australian perspective, in the short term, tourism is going to favour destinations with strong visiting family and relatives connections. We know that that's going to be a really important part of return visitation and distinctive experiences, which was one of the key things on your poll. We know that from our perspective, from our tourism supply chain, our partners, our industry partners, it's about those who can really invest quickly in health screening. And you know, I think, as you correctly said in an earlier question, we're actually starting to build this right into the core of our messaging. So this is not just about talking about, you know, the price war and how competitive we can be with regard to attracting people through some competitive packaging and pricing. It's about building, I guess, emotional comfort and making sure that they understand that we're a first world medical, you know, or a destination with first world medical facilities. And that we've listened, that we're open, that we've listened, and that we understand what is important to them right now. So it's almost a blend of what's come across in your poll. I would support the results.
Okay, now let me ask you a slightly variation on that. We've talked on the show about the fact that airlines don't compete on safety. We've said that we don't think hotels are really going to be able to say, stay with us, we're cleaner than our competition. Can countries do this? Can countries say, come visit us, it's safer here, we'll take better care of you than other places?
Well, first of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, but thanks for having me on the show. No major surprises in the poll, no major surprises. This has been a catastrophe for our industry, it really has, and people are nervous and people are scared and people need reassurance. But I think you can't just sell people something, you know, that isn't true here. You know, people will be looking for authentic experiences, but they need to know that they can go to a destination, that they're not going to get this virus, that they're not going to bring it home, and they're not going to end up being quarantined in a different country. So reassurance is important, but I don't think that it's something that we can necessarily compete on. And I think everybody has to go out and give that reassurance. This is a virus that knows no boundaries, no borders, and you know, the figures that you showed earlier on in relation to which countries are doing how well is an indication, really, you know, of the seriousness with which this infection has been taken. And I think you can see certain countries across the globe that have done very well, and others that the curve has started to go the wrong direction, which is a disaster for our industry, particularly in the northern hemisphere as we head into the summer season with news of second lockdowns. But some of the infection rates are, I mean, they're a catastrophe. I mean, if you go back to where we were a month ago, I genuinely thought that we might be seeing US and UK visitors, you know, being able to come to Ireland for some part of the summer season. But we still have a 14-day quarantine isolation regime in place at the moment. We'll be there till at least the 20th of July. And I'm very sure there are certain countries that won't see Ireland now in August. And that's got worse since things were there a month ago. So health and safety important, but above all, we can't compromise on that.
Gotcha.
I have a question for you, because I mean, and Jen and Niall, you know, I love you both dearly. So a question to you both, actually. Exactly as you've said, Niall, we've got real challenges because this is a healthcare challenge and a humanitarian challenge before it's an economic and a travel and tourism challenge. So both of you, as champions of your destinations, many would think, grand, Niall's got 100 days off. He can just sit back. He doesn't need to market the destination. No one's traveling anyway. Why are you both so exhausted? Because I know you are, and that you're working tirelessly, but as destination champions, leaders, and promoters, doing what? Why bother, and what difference will it make later?
Jan, you go first.
Thank you, Niall. It's such a good question. I certainly haven't been asked that by our board, but I've sometimes wondered if they are wondering what we are doing amidst these unusual times. I think that it's a very important time for us to actually, as a brand, as a destination, to build a relationship with our audience. There's this concept of deferred demand, which has now become really important. So in other words, a lot of what we're doing as an organization, other than the obvious, a lot of our energy is going into working with our industry. And I mean, we've just come out of the most incredible bushfires as well. So a lot of it is very much in that recovery phase. But when it comes to demand generation, we are making sure that we are engaging our audiences more targeted than ever. We've got some of the most assertive, targeted digital strategies that are going on at the moment to make sure that we are top of mind, that we are building our relationship with that audience, knowing that things will change in time. This is not about actually being tactical. It's not about sending packages. It's about actually saying, what is different about coming to Australia? Why is this a bucket list experience? and really starting to actually build an emotional connection and get into a conversation through social media with a lot of our audiences. So for us, demand certainly has not disappeared. If anything, we think that this is a time for us to be not tone deaf, to understand more than ever the psychology, this bruised psyche at the moment, of the importance of people dreaming, hoping, planning. We're looking very closely at the data. We work with organizations, there are lots of them, but we work with Hodari, and we're looking at search trends, making sure that we're close to what's happening in Google. So we're almost looking behind the scenes to make sure that we're aligning a lot of our marketing investment and the demand generation spike as we move up towards looking at where search trends are coming from. So we're almost a step behind our consumer. We've built out a whole lot of virtual experiences so that although many places are experiencing Australia from home, they can still go and see some of the highlights, some of the most exquisite parts of Australia they can see from their lounge, from their home. So I guess it's about being agile, course correcting, but not losing sight of the importance of building that relationship.
It's true. Niall, what are your thoughts there? Why are you so tired?
Me? No, look, I'm not tired. We have a great team across the globe, but I think this posed unprecedented questions and challenges for us. I came into tourism after 9/11, and I thought I'd seen it all over the last 18 years, but this really framed a different set of questions for us. And some of those were things like, how does a brand continue to speak? Who and what, from an audibility and visibility perspective, continues to carry the voice of Ireland out there? How do you reassure your customers that we will be here with open arms, ready to welcome you when the time is right to do so? So we established 9 multidisciplinary teams across the markets, various teams like culinary, scenery, landscape, but culture really came to the fore, something that often gets paid lip service, the arts and culture during times of economic success. And we ended up broadcasting some solo concerts that people did at cultural venues. It reached amazing audiences, but more importantly, it wasn't just the broadcast of the concert, but was the conversation that went on around it. So it meant that we were reconnecting in a visible and audible way with the things that people identify with Ireland. And it created a real emotional connection to some extent, and reminded people why Ireland was great, and remind them that we're always going to be here, because we will get through this. It's just very tough at the moment. So that's been going on since really the middle of March. And, the hard sell is not appropriate to do at this time. But we now are in a phase where we're starting to move on to start thinking about what the future looks like. It's about restart, rebuild, redesign. But it's very hard to put timescales on that because things are so fluid. They change on a daily and a weekly basis. So I think that's going to be the key to success in the short term, will be the agility and the capacity, to change depending on how our markets change. But above all, renewing those relationships that bring your destination and make it really important to people across the globe.
What's also lovely is that as you're showing off your destination to the world, you're also showing it off to your own people, which helps the domestic tourism interest as well. Demian, over to you. Questions?
Yeah, I had a question. I'm not sure there's a clear answer to this, but what I've been reading, it seems like countries are going to go in one of 2 directions. One is restrict the number of inbound travelers internationally, raise prices, reduce density, eliminate any kind of sense of, I know Anita's favorite word, over tourism, and which means prices will go up, but there'll be a sense of more privacy and more security. And then there's the opposite strategy, which is to say, let's let the industry regulate itself. We're not going to impose as many restrictions from the government. We're going to try to maybe provide some discounts or some subsidies to fill up those planes, fill up hotels, and try to steal some of that business from other places because of the price value relationship. Do you see it playing out that way, or is there a middle ground, or how do you see the national strategies for international tourism playing out? Maybe you want to start with this one.
Yeah, that there are a lot of moving parts in this. I don't think there's any one answer to it, as you said at the beginning. I mean, from an Irish perspective, 85% of people who come here come by air. So air connectivity is absolutely and utterly vital. And we have an aviation recovery task force that I'm a member of, and it's very keen to see quarantine being lifted, but does accept that it's not possible to lift quarantine unless you've got a really good track and trace system in place. Because it will be, again, another disaster if we headed into the winter with a major surge. So that's a delicate balancing act, that issue between saving lives and saving livelihoods. And that's where leadership and politics really comes into it. I think our country here has done a very good job in flattening the curve. There's a degree of caution. We entered stage 3 of our reopening last Monday. which saw hotels and restaurants and some bars reopen on stage 4 on the 20th of July. But, you know, there were concerns over the weekend where, you know, large crowds were seen around town, and that the risks associated with young people who maybe prefer to take more risks because elderly people are more vulnerable with this infection. So there's a timely reminder from our Prime Minister today to say that people got to behave themselves because they may delay reopening on phase 4 if that was the case. So it's a really tricky balance because you've got an industry that is really enthusiastic to get going again, but in the absence of a vaccine, we're always going to have this cloud over our head. So I'm hopeful that we can continue on the path that we've had here in Ireland. I really hope that our colleagues across mainland Europe will see the same thing, and that we can get back in the air. But a delicate balancing, I have to say. I'm glad I'm not an elected official, but in terms of advice, I think we need to move towards liberalisation of our quarantine measures here, but I think you have to keep that under constant review.
Okay. And Jan, something a different view than that?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I guess we are certainly long haul, and I guess from that perspective, you know, we're not seeing international visitation return anytime soon, based on our restrictions and the way that our governments are handling the pandemic. So from our perspective, what we're seeing happen at the moment, and this is open to course correction, as you said, as governments may or may not subsidize, but ultimately, it feels like we're leaving the economics of supply and demand to industry. As you say, you know, the configuration is changing of our tourism sector, from restaurants to flights to everything, and that is going to absolutely create a different economic environment, different commercials at play. But from our perspective, we're certainly leaving it to our industry at the moment. There is an expectation that, as you say, the costs are going to rise. I think that it is going to become, I certainly don't want to refer to it as elitist, but certainly tourism as we know it in its mainstream sense is going to become a little more cost prohibitive, and happening at the same time where disposable incomes are being affected, and we're you know, globally starting to really feel the effect of this financially. So yeah, it's down to supply and demand from our perspective.
Thank you.
Interesting you say that, and we've got some questions from our viewers actually, Demian, I want to flip over to, but I like how you both actually said you have to be involved with the airlines now, because ultimately that's the lifeblood itself. Questions from our audience?
Sarah, you there?
Yes, I have one from Hernan asking, do you think that, or what are your thoughts on the recovery of remote but isolated destinations?
Remote, isolated destinations.
Great question. Great question.
Do the honors.
What do you think, Jan?
I think actually these are trends that were starting before the pandemic, but this has now just been absolutely accelerated. People are looking for that transformational travel experience, and now more than ever, as you said earlier, Demian, people don't want a high density experience. They're looking for things that are unique, that are braggable, but certainly that give them open spaces, you know, whether it's self-drive or however they get there, they're looking for those more isolated experiences. And we are even seeing that a country as large as Australia, and with so much diversity, we're seeing that even within Australia from a domestic perspective, that people as Australians are going to parts of Australia that they've never been to before, and they're seeking out those incredibly remote, isolated parts that are really quite transformational experiences. There's definitely a demand for that.
Okay. Sarah, we got another question?
Yes. Felipe asks, how can you measure the success of destination marketing during this time?
Yeah, now, I mean, obviously you're not measuring people coming in right now. So how do you measure if what you're doing now is going to have had any benefit?
Well, ultimately at the moment, it's really about engagement levels, you know. I mean, what's interesting is that we've had more traffic on our website this year than we've had last year when 11 million people were coming to Ireland. So I think what that's saying is that more people are at home, more people are looking about, they are exploring, they're open to content. And the question is, can you create that emotional connection? This is a long-term game, not about converting today or tomorrow, but really maintaining long-term emotional connection. We obviously do a lot of analytical work on our website, but the other thing as well is our relationship with the travel trade is important. The other trend that we've seen, not something you can measure easily, is that a lot of people within the travel trade industry, which is very important for Ireland, have been furloughed or let go. So there's a whole new set of relationships now that need to be created, because for us, I mean, the last 50, 60 years, you've got travel agents and travel trade who have been really loyal to Ireland, and through difficult times either haven't made it through this recession or may have had to let staff go. So we are renewing our acquaintance, putting a lot more effort into it, because I think this idea to get out into the greater open space, so to speak, is something that the travel trade can deliver at very short notice. And I think those relationships will be key on the short to medium term.
Great, good answer.
I'm going to jump in something on that, because I must say, Niall, forgive me, but I have to commend you, because you have been unbelievably active on social media, and you've been doing it in a way that's gone through all the niches that you speak about. But what's lovely about it is a lot of destinations speak as the destination brand, but you speak as the CEO, and it is very reflective of the Irish spirit as well, because it's very personal, it's very inviting, and it's very proud. And exactly to your point, Jan, about creating that engagement and that connection, it's interesting how you've become one of the real brand assets, because you've showed the world how proud you are to be in Ireland, and that you're waiting for them to come. So I must say, it's a lovely tonality and voice of the brand as an extension.
Well, thank you, very kind. I used to joke that I used to post my social media so my family knew where I was, but I've been at home for the last 4 months, longer than I've been for the last 18 years, I can tell you. But yeah, I mean, I think the social media is you know, there are a lot of negative sides to social media, but travel and tourism has been a great beneficiary, because I just try and post a story a day, and it just tells my story in relation to where I've been and what I've experienced. And it's nice sometimes, particularly during these difficult times. I was in the southwest of Ireland over the last 3 days, down playing golf with my brother. But I encountered, it was nice to be able to, on a personal side, receive hospitality at home. And it was terrific to see that the lights are still on, everyone's home, everyone's working hard under very difficult circumstances. And it's great to be able to give people a pat on the back, and they really appreciate it. And that's what you said, the spirit of Ireland is born upon. It is really that sort of friendliness and warmth of the people that comes through our research all the time.
It's great.
Sarah, let's get another question.
Yes, a question from Steve asking, well, it's a question for Jan from Steve. How much will bubble agreements for travel with New Zealand, Hawaii, and other select destinations save the tourism industry? Will it be enough to keep it going?
So, yeah, great question. Will it be enough is an ambiguous response. It is absolutely essential for us. I mean, I think Australia does really well. I mean, over 76% of total revenue from tourism is still domestic, so we can't lose sight of that. But from a stabilization and a growth perspective, many parts of Australia are very heavily reliant upon international visitation. So, you know, we're hoping that those bubbles that we're working towards and I guess hoping for do come into fruition sooner than later, because certainly from our perspective, we are managing, if I could say, the decline. We know that business is hurting, and it can only carry on for so long before actually, you know, we have a large part of our industry that actually just simply is not able to recover. So the international portion of our visitation, obviously with New Zealand being right on our doorstep, and it is almost an extension of Australia as we see it. But those type of international, that type of international visitation is absolutely fundamental and contributes a lot to Australia in terms of revenue. So I think it's essential. At the moment, it doesn't look like it's likely to happen in the short term. It's more of a medium term. We're looking more at September, where we're really seeing some bounce back from between some of those bubbles. And interestingly, what we were talking about, in fact, just coming on the back of what Niall was saying, the role of social media. One of the things we've been doing in that relationship building and using social media to be that conduit for us is we've been talking to, particularly the Kiwis we've been engaging in New Zealand, to say, what is your favorite experience in Australia? Because this is all a heavy repeat visitation market. So not only using social to be able to push out beautiful content, but really actually pull in a lot of commentary and get people to share, you know, become advocates and say, well, this is what I'm going to do next. So that's all part of seeding what we see will ultimately be followed when connectivity returns.
Very good.
Our Wizards of Oz have told me we're on to our last question, Demian.
Okay, let's get a good one, Sarah.
A question from Banjo. To what extent has this crisis changed your target audience in the sense of international versus domestic?
Jan, you want to start?
Massively. I've just been, you know, recently finished working on our business plans for the fiscal ahead, and for us, it really is. I mean, we're hoping to be able to pull New Zealand into that, but ultimately we are looking at a domestic play for the next period of time. In fact, it's intrastate, then moving to interstate, and then looking at international, those tight concentric circles, just understanding how people are going to be comfort zones in you know, starting to get back into travel. And then short haul international is going to be essential. So at the moment, our budgets and our investment is very much focused on domestic, and maybe reigniting it in a way that we haven't focused for a long time, because it has all been about our international source markets. Yeah, so for us, it's looking at new audiences, new categories, new experiences, as Niall was saying, and getting a lot closer to delivering the type of experiences to our local base that we normally, they might have gone and looked for elsewhere, looking at outbound. So a lot of what we're doing is actually targeting our audiences who we know might have been going to Europe to, you know, ski or something, you know, and making sure that they understand what we domestically can offer in that space. Same with cultural and same with other types of experiences. So probably more hyper targeted than ever, and trying to really make sure that we can capitalize on the fact that there isn't any outbound, and really harness our domestic visitation and dispersal across Australia as much as possible, with a keen focus on aviation recovering as quickly as possible internationally.
And I imagine domestic has its challenges as well, with certain areas seeing the virus spreading again. Your approach to maybe Victoria right now has to change, because it's not even that easy in a large country with people spread out. It's almost like being a continent.
It's unprecedented. I mean, I don't know if you would have seen, but in the news today, we had Gladys Berejiklian, our Premier, who said that she was, you know, not pro borders being closed from a state perspective, just vehemently closing the New South Wales border with Victoria, because frankly, the risks are too high. And I think we've all become, we realize that we're not bulletproof. We realize that, you know, our industry is based on mobility, but unfortunately, so is a pandemic. Yeah. So for us, it's really come down to, as you said right in the very early introduction, this is about lives and livelihoods and managing that. So we can't keep borders closed, because absolutely it's our industry just hemorrhages when we close state borders, but we have to put people first. And I must say, from an Australian government perspective, a complex situation to manage, but certainly I do feel like they have put the community first. And it's not easy right now, as you're saying, in terms of state borders closing. You feel like you've taken 2 steps forward, and unfortunately it just seems to resurface. And that's without international borders even importing the virus. It's just local.
It's true.
Thank you. Niall, real quick answer: domestic, international budget.
Well, from a domestic perspective, it accounts for about 25% of our tourism industry, so it's not going to be enough to carry the day, I'm afraid. It will be more important, obviously, just for this summer. And our new government will be launching a special package for the hospitality industry to revive it during the course of the month. But international is where we need to get back to. And I think that's where the safety and reassurance becomes really, really important. We've had a great track record of flattening the curve. And that's really good. I just hope other countries can get in the same direction. Maybe we'll join your health corridor down in Australia and New Zealand yet. You never know. The Australians are great visitors to Ireland, by the way. They're our 10th biggest in terms of volume, but our number 6 market in terms of value. And hence the importance of the friend and family market, because what our research is telling us, and we've been conducting COVID research in the marketplace for the last 2 months, is that people will be looking for comfort in the known. They'll be looking to reconnect with family and friends. They're looking for reassurance, and And that's interesting. I think the family market and visiting friends is going to become much more important. So we're happy to say hello to all our friends in Australia. We'll welcome them to Ireland, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Thank you.
I must say,
look
Niall,
forward
I think
to
you're
that.
one of the most tweetable leaders I know of. The number of little sound bites, okay, it's quite special. So on that, we gave you both a challenge when you did the briefing a few days ago about how RISE, our name, has been turned into an acronym. So I would love to know, as both of you as exceptional marketeers, Jan and Niall, R is I, S, and E. What do they stand for? Ms. Hutton, over to you.
Oh gosh, no, Niall, you go first. You go first, Niall. I've just
you're
got my pen
easy.
out.
We
Trying
still
to...
today. You're hours ahead of us.
Well, the
I'm
O for
serious
me.
now.
Oh, sorry, who's starting? Am I starting?
Yeah, go ahead now.
Yes.
Well, I put 3 R's in because it ties in nicely with our revival plan about restart, rebuild, redesign. That's the path that we're on. We need to inspire, we need to succeed, and underpinning it all is what our industry is about, is emotional experiences.
Thank you.
And when you say that with your accent, it's just poetic, so that just works.
And Jan?
Jan.
Oh, wow. I must say, I think yours is probably a little bit more heartfelt, and I'm probably sounding a little bit more binary than I'd like to right now. But this is what it's about for me and what I feel it is about for our industry. And I'm sorry if it doesn't sound quite as inspirational, but I think we need to be ready. Like, I think it's almost back to basics. We need to be ready, and we need to have this appetite of adjusting. So for me, it's about the readiness. But I think we can't lose sight of the fact that ultimately this is travel. It is meant to be about exploration and inspiration. So the I for me has to be about inspiration. And that means about the way our industry reinvents as much as it is about how we welcome and engage our audience. The S, I was stumbling over the S. I think probably a little bit of a more personal story, but ultimately we came through bushfires and it was all about community. At the moment, I think that we're in a position where I think the S almost stands for, it stands for self. I feel, and this is not meant to be a selfish thing, I actually think it's very important that individuals are going through, we are all going through this unbelievably traumatic experience. And whether it's, just mental health or looking at the absolute unprecedented levels of uncertainty, I think more than ever, we have to be checking in with ourselves. We have to make sure that we're healthy, we're optimistic, and that we are being able to navigate ourselves. I mean, you talk as a leader, but also just as a person. So I think that just that sense of self is probably more important than ever. And then E, although I must say I do love the fact that you said emotional, now that's a great word for it, but I just think evidence. Like, I think we've got to almost put our toe in the water, and we've just got to, there is no textbook here. We've just got to be able to monitor this and course correct as we go, and make sure that as the evidence presents itself, that we are just ahead of the curve and ready to respond. It's this new change quotient that we need to become used to in the way that we think and work.
Well, thank you very much for both those acronyms. That ties in nicely, I think, with what we've been talking about today and throughout RISE. I want to thank both of you very much for Anita, myself, and the entire team for being here. Really interesting and something I don't really know a lot about. So I learned a lot from this episode, as I'm sure a lot of my students in our audience did as well. So thank you very much. And hopefully we'll be able to come to Ireland and New South Wales soon and see you both.
Indeed. Thanks so much to you both. And keep watching from backstage. We have something extremely exciting coming up we'd love you to see. So thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to real hugs soon, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the opportunity. It's been wonderful to spend this time with you.
Stunning.
Thank you so much indeed. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks so much. Yay. Special, special day. As Demian and I started this journey together, it was 100 days ago when he and I came together at the beginning of lockdown to say, we need to do something. So long story short, this is the 100-day celebration. We've had 100 days of RISE. We wanted to celebrate it all with you. Huge thanks to everyone who's joined us, to our Wizards of Oz who've made this happen, to Jessica, our chief wizard, who produced this, especially for everyone who's been a part of RISE. With our love and thanks. we find a place where we can simply come together and ask the questions? Importantly, how do we not waste these 100 days? How do we use them so that all of us can prepare for the future that's ahead of us?
I think we should begin by first explaining what this show is all about. And the best way we think to do it is to explain what it's not. It's not a lecture, it's not a class, it's definitely not a news show. We want this to be a conversation, not only a conversation between Anita and myself and with our guests every week, but also with you, the students, graduates, job seekers, and other people who are passionate about the industry.
We know that there are so many dimensions which we just cannot control. As Churchill said, I think we're at the end of the beginning, and I think we need to be patient. There is so much yet that we need to learn and understand about this virus. Ultimately, we as a society, we as business, we as individuals can, and I believe, optimist as I am, will come out stronger.
We can always learn from previous crises, and what we're seeing is that this is a truly global situation with the pandemic. So everybody has been hit at the same time. And there really is no winners or losers. We're all in this together.
But it's the context that allows us to keep looking forward.
I mean, we're facing the Kodak moment, aren't we? So everybody needs to innovate. And I think that is the absolute key challenge of our time at the moment.
Cycles can be a good thing because they're part of a rejuvenation of sectors.
Move from being a peace general to a war general. And a war general has to problem solve really fast, has to accept that speed trumps perfection, has to accept to make mistakes for the greater good. Not everybody's going to be happy by the decisions you make, but you have to act with a lot of speed.
I would be encouraging young people to look much further across a number of industries for their next step. I know that sounds like, boy, I trained for this industry and you're going to encourage me to look outside. But the fact is, you can jump back in.
There is no way to handle fear. Overcoming fear is one of the biggest challenges. I think what we are more confronted with is the subject of your webinar. Is how are you going to rise above this challenge?
I think that the nature of business is just going to look different. I think technology is going to be a huge part of that. So for the younger people have maybe a challenge, have more of an opportunity than some of us who are still trying to figure out how to get onto a Zoom call. I think that the world is going to be an exciting place again once we get through this.
The business is still a people business. So you better have your heart and your empathy in the right place, otherwise you don't belong in the industry.
The role of nature, the role of the environment, the role of climate change, and our response to it is a really important part of us coming out of this. How can we do things better in the future?
Cannot move towards a completely sterile environment and sterile life. I think COVID-19 is something that is teaching us as to what might come in the future. We will be dealing with pandemics, we'll be dealing with things that we have not dealt with in the past, that we have no experience with, and we learn as we go along. That doesn't mean that life stops. It just means that we have to adapt and we have to change.
What should they do with these 100 days, and what will be their story that they can tell people that they lived through and did for themselves during these days?
Yay.
Good job, Jessica.
Do you know, Demian, your posture has not changed for
nor has your wardrobe. Nor has your wardrobe. I even seen that exact outfit.
Thank you to you, to the Grouch. It would not have been the same, and I love my Mondays because of you, so thank you very much. And to everyone who's followed us.
I agree. I really appreciate everybody watching and you and the entire team letting me play along all these weeks. I have a good time. And before we have to move forward, I want to be conscious of the time. So I think next up is our COVID-19 story.
Indeed it is. As we say every week, we'd love to hear what you have to say in terms of your life and how you're going through these 100 days and making the most of them. Send us an email to riseweekly2020@gmail.com. We'll get you on our Instagram posting. And here is our lovely COVID-19 story for this week.
Hey everyone, my name is Claire. I am from Hong Kong and I just graduated from EHL in February 2020. Originally, when I had first graduated, I was about to rush into a recruitment job. However, due to the virus, the company had to suspend my application and I was officially back on the job hunt. During this time, I was applying to everything from banking to insurance, and at one point I even undertook a temporary contract in an advertising firm. During all of this, I was still really struggling to find out what I was passionate about, and I never really felt 100% about the jobs I was applying to, even to the recruitment position. The good news is that during this period of time, the company reached out again for a job in corporate consulting, in which I will actually be starting in August. My journey since graduation has definitely not been the smoothest, but it has been a great learning experience. And I am glad I took this time to truly discover what makes me happy in both my personal and professional life.
Stunning.
I really, even though I think I know everybody's stories and they're all going through things the same, everybody has something slightly different, and you do learn from them. And I hope this show gives people a chance to do that. I mentioned that because next week we've got something very special. We're calling the show Your Time to Rise. And Anita, you want to explain it?
This is a really special one because, as we said from the very beginning of this journey, we are creating this journey and this jersey for all of you, for you and with you, which is why it's so important we get your feedback. So we actually have some of our viewers, whether they're students, graduates, job seekers, professionals, people who have actually been watching us through this journey, coming on the program with us. This is our chance to hear from you, and for you, the viewers, to ask other people how they're getting through these 100 and maybe the next 100 days, because we've still got a long journey to go. So please do join us next Monday. In between now and then, if you missed any of our programs, it's rise-weekly.com. We'll have this week's program on in a couple of days. Send us any feedback you want us to know at our email or at our Twitter address. We love having you with us. Demian and I are going to hang around for the inbox for some last questions, so we make sure that we get everyone's questions answered. So as we officially close, we thank you all. As usual, stay safe, stay strong, stay home, keep your hands clean. Look forward to seeing you next week on Monday. And for those who want to hang on and join us for the inbox, we'll be back in a few seconds. Hey, Grouch.
Oh, I thought you would have changed.
Thought I were black for a change.
I know that there's some questions, so Sarah, let's jump into those.
Yes, Dimitri is asking, what is your advice to people who got laid off at the beginning of the crisis? What do you think will be the best preventative course of action considering health, financial, and professional factors?
That's a really interesting question. Don't look at me with that look of you take it. It's an interesting question because the answer goes across personal and professional. Professional, as we've been saying for the last 100 and something days, it's really important to keep the hope up and keep the interest up. There are new avenues that are going to be opening up. There's no question about it. Many people are out there, whether they've been laid off, furloughed, or waiting to graduate, whatever it is, many people are in the same situation. So exactly as some of our execs and residents have said, use this time to really tap into where you think the opportunity for you is. Not just in the industry, but in terms of what's really of interest to you. At a personal level, that's a whole different conversation. And I think that's something that needs to be taken care of very personally at a private level. Engaging with what you know is your own personal audit of expenses and life in general, working with your family, seeing what is possible. That's something Demian and I are unqualified to provide, and it's quite honestly irresponsible to provide advice on. But keep hopeful. We're all in this, and importantly, the team at Rise is in this with you.
The other thing I'm going to add is, as I've been answering questions from former students or students, there are some people hiring. I have not seen a lot of people get positions, but it is out there, so you can't lose faith. I think it's all about your network right now. It's letting people know what you're trying to do, what you want to do, what you're interested in, paying attention to what's out there, what other people are doing. People are starting businesses. They might need your skills. So you really got to be energetic. And luckily I'm still employed and I have this. And I imagine it's a tough time for a lot of people, but I do think there are opportunities and you have to stay positive. You have to stay engaged. People have to see that you're trying and you're doing something. So
you make a great point, Demian. Sorry, I just want to rewind there, because whether it's getting jobs, buying and selling homes, whatever it is, people are making plans. Because I think the important thing is when we went into lockdown, people were, is this going to be 100 days, 150 days? Now we know we've got a few more months to go. And people are not stopping living. So I think that's a really important point that you make. The opportunities are out there. I have some friends and colleagues who have actually had their kids or others get exceptional jobs during this time. It's quite wow. So if anything, if everyone's looking the other way, keep your eye on the radar, because you might end up getting something that other people didn't anticipate.
I agree. Sarah, let's take another question.
Yes, I think it's time for our last question for the day. So Howard asks, how can the need to encourage employees who are furloughed or laid off to come back to reopening operations be managed?
Interesting question. I think that it also depends a lot on governments and when they're actually lifting those actual schemes themselves. A lot of people are going to be struggling with the idea of going back to work, quite honestly, not because of the work, but because of the logistics around work. I know here in London, a lot of people are looking forward to getting back into the offices. They just don't deal with the transport systems every morning and every evening. So a lot of it is reminding people of what they've missed. It comes back down to huggability, Demian, I'm afraid.
I saw an interesting study about university professors, primarily in the US, but also something similar in Europe. And it was saying, even though I think it was, I don't have the exact numbers, but something about 3/4 of universities in America have said they are going to reopen in the fall in some capacity. They want the students back on campus, living there where they can sort of monitor them and encourage social distancing and being tested, et cetera. But a lot of professors are saying, well, we don't want to come on campus to teach because we're concerned that we can't necessarily be safe with the students. And so we want to come and teach. We know it's better on campus. We know the experience is there. Bring the students back, let them have a lot of the college experience, but the classes might end up being online. So it's not quite the same thing about the logistics, but there are concerns. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see how different industries and businesses in different areas are able to open, even if the government says you can or you should, how they can actually do this when there's so many different stakeholders with different concerns and susceptibilities to the virus, for example. It'll be interesting to see.
It's true, it'll be a cocktail. It won't be live or virtual anymore. So, great point. That was the last question for our first 100 days. How cool is that? So we look forward to having everyone with us next week as we start with question number 1 for day 101. But to everyone, thank you very much for joining us as always. It is a joy to have you with us, and we are really, really grateful. Thank you for being with me as I cope with the grouch every single week. It's always good fun to laugh with you, Demian, but it's even more fun to laugh at you.
And I want to appreciate, I know that Richard Quest said has 460 million viewers. We're close to that number, but we'd love to get to that number for next season and for the next episode. So do encourage your friends to watch along so we can tell Richard he comes in second.
Brilliant. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye.